Welcome to Pop Health Week, streaming live on Healthcare Now Radio. I'm Greg Masters, co-founder and executive producer. Joining me in the virtual studio is partner and co-founder Fred Goldstein, lead host and president at Accountable Health, LLC. Pop Health Week is your destination for unfiltered conversations with the visionaries driving population health forward. Whether you're a payer, provider, patient vendor, or policymaker, this is your go-to hub for fresh strategies and insights into population health best practices. Want to stay connected? Visit popupstudio.productions or message me on Twitter via @GregMastersMPH, and that's Greg with 2 G's. And do follow the show at Pop Health Week. To reach Fred direct, visit www.accountablehealthllc.com. With no further delay, Fred, who's in the seat today?
Thanks so much, Greg. And Caitlin, welcome to Pop Health Week.
Hi, Fred. Thanks for having me.
It's really a pleasure to get you on. We've known each other for a number of years. Why don't you give our audience a little sense of your background?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So, hi, audience. I'm Caitlin. My background is largely in clinical research coordination, medical device development, medical marketing, neuroscience, sort of a whole mix of things, which has led me to now be a director of patient engagement at the Michael J. Fox Foundation. I've been here for about 5 years, just under 5 years, working on educating people on research, getting them interested in research, and hopefully encouraging them to participate in research.
So talk a little bit about that, some of the research efforts that they're doing at the Michael J. Fox Foundation.
Yeah, so the Michael J. Fox Foundation, some people are very familiar with our work, others are less familiar. We are actually the largest nonprofit funder of Parkinson's disease research. And we've been around since the early 2000s, founded by Michael J. Fox in conjunction with some other folks. And our goal is to fund as much research into Parkinson's as possible so that eventually we can slow the disease, stop the disease, and prevent the disease from even starting in the first place. We fund mostly external researchers. We do have a very large scientific staff that provide inputs on what we should be funding, on what is really promising in the field. But mostly we then give this money out to thousands of people around the world in the form of grants. We do also manage some of our own research. We are the sponsor of a very large observational study, which means that the study is looking at people's health over time, not doing any interventional drug or anything of that type. And that study has been ongoing for 16 years. You might have heard of it. It's called the Parkinson's Progression Markers Initiative. And we're looking at people with and without Parkinson's to try to understand how the disease starts and changes over time, who gets it, and why.
So talk a little bit about that. I know the study was, you said, 16 years old, founded in 2010, I believe, and it's enrolled how many people and sort of what do they do?
Great question. To date, we've enrolled over 4,000 people. And these people are around the world. We have 50 sites in 12 countries across the globe. We ask people to come in generally once a year or twice a year, and they are giving us so many different things. They are providing us with biological samples so that we can better understand the biology of disease. They answer a number of questionnaires so we can understand what's happening in their day-to-day life. And then they also provide us in between these in-person visits with other information, either online or via a remote visit. And these folks, I should say, are both people with Parkinson's and then people who are control volunteers, so they don't have Parkinson's or any risk that we know of for Parkinson's, and people who are at higher risk for Parkinson's, which falls into a couple of different categories.
So yeah, could you sort of talk about some of those categories? Because I know that in terms of the research project, it's sort of changed on the enrollment perspective into how that works.
Absolutely. That's a really great point, Fred. So in the beginning, we were looking at a lot of people. And when I say we, I mean the foundation at large. We were looking at people who had Parkinson's and people who might have a genetic risk factor for Parkinson's. That was a really big focus in the first few years of the study. And as time went on and we learned more about the disease and what could put somebody at higher risk for Parkinson's, we've shifted those people that we're recruiting and enrolling into the study. Right now, we have seen in the data that there seems to be a pretty strong correlation or connection between somebody having a loss of sense of smell, so sustained smell loss, not related to COVID or some sort of damage to your nose, and then eventually developing neurodegenerative disease. This is really interesting to us. And so now we're looking at people who have loss of sense of smell and then have some other biological markers. So potentially something in their cerebral spinal fluid, something in a brain scan that indicates to us that they might be at higher risk for Parkinson's. The other very large group of people that we're very interested in connecting with are those who have a sleep disorder called REM sleep behavior disorder. And this is a fairly small part of the general population. However, many, many people with Parkinson's do have REM sleep behavior disorder or RBD or other sleep disturbances. So we're very interested in seeing who with RBD and smell loss may be more likely to develop Parkinson's over the course of 5 years, 10 years, even longer than that.
Hmm. And can you talk some about that recruitment process and how that works?
This is my bread and butter. This is what I do every day. So PPMI, which is the acronym that we use for the Parkinson's Progression Markers Initiative, is a little bit unusual because the study is so large. We are not able to only rely on in-clinic recruitment. A lot of clinical research studies, both observational and interventional, so clinical trials, are really asking the study sites to look at their clinic population and say, oh, you have this diagnosis, you have this marker, you are eligible for the study. We do some of that. However, the huge number of people that we're looking for means that we need to go much broader than that. So in the US, we use a centralized recruitment system. We are connected with many different partners. So we look to different referral vendors. We look at other research registries. So the Brain Health Registry, the Brain Donor Project, the Alzheimer's Prevention Registry, and say, hey, would we be able to connect with your community either via a post on your website or via an email, and then people can opt in to participate in our research. That's one way that we're looking for some of those specialized populations like people with RBD, Parkinson's, or loss of sense of smell. We also have an in-house marketing team that does a lot of marketing. So Facebook, Meta, Instagram, Google, Bing, Nextdoor, any website that you are on, we try to have advertisements on there because we know that people are going to see these and then maybe think about participating and eventually come into the study. The interesting thing about this is none of these processes happen in a vacuum. We often will hear from somebody, oh, I saw your ad on Facebook and I joined the study. But if we look at the data of how they came into the study, it was actually via a different method. So we know that people are seeing these things, they are thinking about them, and then eventually saying, yes, I'm interested in participating.
Yeah, and I know back in the day, I saw the Facebook ad and
Yes.
responded to that and got involved, which has really been fantastic. I've very much enjoyed it. Can you talk some about the My PPMI site and how that works?
Yes. This is also something that is very unique to the PPMI study. Because the study is so large and people are contributing so much, we were trying to figure out a way to really return value to participants. We have people who've been in the study the entire time. So since 2010 up until now, 2026, that is 16 years of involvement. We have other people who've been in the study for shorter periods of time, but for everyone, we want to be able to say, you have given us so much. And this is what is happening with your data. We are so grateful to you. One way that we do that is on this website, myppmi.org, which Fred mentioned. And this is really, we try to think of it as a one-stop shop for all things related to PPMI. Participants can sign up for PPMI there. They can participate in online questionnaires. There are all sorts of new opportunities throughout the year that people can participate in. We have what are called sub-studies, which are studies within the larger PPMI study that might be a one-off questionnaire or an opportunity to participate in person. And then the really interesting thing about My PPMI is that this is where participants can go to see their individual research information. Most studies don't return research information to folks, so the results from various tests. We had heard from the community, including Fred, that it was very important to them that they received something back in form of data, in the form of their personal data, so that they could understand a little bit more about their journey within the Parkinson's world or Parkinson's adjacent world. So we do also return results there or research information there in a few different formats.
Yeah, it's really been excellent to see that change. And it's also fascinating. Talk about that website in regards to somebody who just has an interest and isn't involved in PPMI, but potentially can go there to learn more and potentially get involved, right?
Yeah, 100%. Anyone who's over the age of 18 in the US and in the UK at this point can make a MyPPMI account. And by making an account, you are not saying that you want to participate in research. You're just raising your hand and saying, I might at some point be interested in participating in this initiative. On the website, you can see information about the study. You can see information about what's been coming out of the study, and then whatever opportunities you might be eligible for. So, I, being a 33-year-old woman, could go on the website, make myself an account, and then it would say, you can participate in the online portion. And in the future, you may be eligible to participate in other parts of the study as well.
Mhm. And one of the key things that happens sort of as an introduction to try to figure out where you stand within the various risks. And it's important for people to understand that just because you have a risk for this disease, it's not 100% that you're going to end up with
Yes.
this disease. This is just typical in population health. We talk about it all the time. You're at risk for heart disease or you're at risk for diabetes. And so these various lifestyle issues or biological markers, et cetera, change your potential risk for developing it. So somebody could, if they're interested, and I know a lot of people have done this, is take that initial smell test, right?
Yes. The first step right now, as I mentioned, we saw this connection between loss of sense of smell, potentially getting neurodegenerative disease, want to understand what's going on there. The first step for anyone who wants to participate in PPMI beyond the online portion is to request a smell test. Like Fred said, this is something that we would send to your home. It's very simple, scratch and sniff smell test. Right now, anyone over the age of 40 in the US who does not have Parkinson's can request a test, and anyone over the age of 30 who does have Parkinson's can request a test. And yeah, like I said, super simple, easy to do at home. And then from there, you'll find out if there are other options for you to participate, either online or in person.
Yeah, and I think it's important to also mention that, for example, the study has set up a site within Africa, right, to look at broader populations of individuals because there are differences sometimes in how these things affect it. And one of the things that I heard that was fascinating was that the smell test was adjusted because they actually have different things they're eating and smelling and things, which makes a
Yes.
ton of sense in the end.
Yes, we've had to think a lot about cultural appropriateness for some of the tests that we're using. And it's not just at our Lego site in Nigeria, it's also
Uh-huh.
that in the UK, we have to use a different version because they don't have skunks there. There is not the animal skunk living on the island of the United
Good for
Kingdom.
them.
Yep. So we have to think a lot about what makes sense for the population that we're looking at, and is it appropriate data wise for it to be compared against the other measures that we're using?
Mhm. And as you're looking at recruitment, this is an ongoing process, I guess. How many more people are you looking to recruit in sort of the various pieces of this?
Yes. As of right now, we are looking to recruit, I believe, around 600 more people who are at higher risk for Parkinson's, and then around 300 more people with Parkinson's. These
Mhm.
do shift day to day because we are consistently enrolling more people, but those are the broad numbers that we're looking at.
Just tuning in? You're listening to Pop Health Week on Healthcare Now Radio with host Fred Goldstein, president of Accountable Health LLC. Stay tuned for the rest of the story.
So I think one of the important things to understand also is what's come out of this study so far. You mentioned a little bit about understanding smell as a potential risk, or loss of smell as a potential risk, or REM-based sleep disorder, et cetera. What have we learned so far?
We have learned so much. I think one of the biggest things that I am remiss for not mentioning earlier is that this study actually found the first biological marker of Parkinson's. Until a few years ago, Parkinson's was only diagnosed, or rather, Parkinson's could only be detected in the body postmortem, so after somebody had passed away. And that was by looking at the brain and looking for different markers of disease in the brain itself. Now, we can actually test for Parkinson's biology in a living person via a lumbar puncture or a spinal tap. And what we found is that in spinal fluid, you can detect misfolded alpha-synuclein, which is a type of protein in the brain. Everybody has alpha-synuclein. This is one of those things where it's normal to have that. We have so many proteins in our brain and otherwise. However, in people with Parkinson's, it seems like this protein gets misfolded, and that might be leading to some of the symptoms and some of the other things that we see when somebody has clinical Parkinson's. This is really exciting because it means that there are likely other biological markers of Parkinson's. And we should, in the future, be able to look at somebody and say, okay, you have these 3 out of 4 markers for Parkinson's in your blood, in your spinal fluid, in your brain scan, et cetera. This is how we're going to treat your Parkinson's based on that information. So that's the biggest thing, is that we found a biological marker of Parkinson's, which is why we started this whole study in the first place. And then outside of that, I think that we're just learning a lot about how to do this type of research. And the other reason that PPMI was started was to de-risk people wanting to move into Parkinson's research and saying, oh, if you want to set up a very large study in all of these different places, this is how you can do it, and this is how you should do it. Right now, we're also thinking about, if we were to shift from being an observational only study into something else, could we be in a good position to do a drug trial? Could we be in a good position to have a large cohort of people that is able to participate in different types of research? And that, I think, comes back to my PPMI, all the different ways that you can participate in research right now. I think by the numbers, we have been cited, we being the PPMI study data, has been cited in over 2,000 publications. The data is downloaded by researchers around the world. Another really important part of PPMI is that all of the data is publicly available. If you are a qualified researcher or person, you can apply for access to this data, and then you can look at it, you can analyze it, you can ask questions, you can publish. You can use that information to start your own study, to start a clinical trial. It's also been used to, I believe, start over 20 clinical trials. So it's not just what we at the foundation and the scientists that are working directly on PPMI are discovering and finding out. It's the fact that anyone can look at this and try to learn from it and move Parkinson's research forward.
Yeah, I think it's really been fantastic that that data is readily available, and the data set is just enormous when you think about the various pieces that go into this, from DAT scans, the lumbar punctures, to the testing, to the MDS-UPDRS stuff, and I think genetics, et cetera, right?
Absolutely. I think that we have a quip, which it's probably still true. It's that if you printed out all of the PPMI data and you lined it up end to end, it would stretch to the moon and back, which just really speaks to the volume of information that we have collected over the years.
Yeah, it's just really been amazing. And I know, sometimes people hear lumbar puncture, a little nervousness about that. I've had, I don't know how many of them now since being in the study. And, it's okay. I do them. They're fine. Each individual has to consider that themselves, but I also know you're looking at other ways to potentially identify the misfolded
Yes.
alpha-synuclein.
Yes. I think right now the lumbar puncture is still the quote gold standard. It is the most accurate way for us to detect this. However, the foundation and PPMI itself are trying to figure out a less invasive way for us to detect this misfolded protein. Some things that are of interest are retinal cells, so cells in your eyes, potentially, nasal cells, cells in your nose, skin. So if you have a little skin biopsy, blood, different parts of the blood itself. I think that we are really committed to finding the easiest and most accurate way for detecting this, so that in the future, if you wanted to have this test done or have a test done to see if you had this misfolded protein, you wouldn't have to have a lumbar puncture, because we do recognize that it is uncomfortable. And hopefully in the future, we'll be able to move away from that.
And I guess right now, we understand that as a potential risk factor. But at some point, some of these biological markers might be able to allow us to understand progression as well, right?
Yes, that is the idea. Right now, one of the limitations of the lumbar puncture test, which is called the alpha-synuclein seed amplification assay, or SAA, is that it is a binary test, which means that it only tells you whether or not you have this misfolded protein. It doesn't tell you how much. It doesn't tell you the severity of it. And in an ideal world, we would be able to track how much protein is aggregating over time. The idea is that the more misfolded protein that you have, the more severe your symptomology or your symptoms with Parkinson's might be. We are moving forward on making this a non-binary test or a quantitative test. I think that they've made good progress on that. We're not quite there yet, but eventually we'd be able to say, okay, Fred, you had this lumbar puncture done. This was your result on this date. And then 3 years later, you had it done, and this is your result, and it's different. And this is what we think it means based on your history and based on what else you've been telling us about how things have been going.
Yeah, and you think about other disease states, whether it's your, blood glucose levels, things like that, that you monitor over
Cholesterol,
time,
absolutely.
cholesterol levels, viral load for HIV, et cetera. You understand the progression of that disease a little bit better. So where is this all going? What's the future look like?
Such a good question. I think that we're moving towards something called, not I think, I know, we are moving towards something that we refer to as precision medicine. And precision medicine is where you take into account all the different factors of how somebody lives and how their body works. So their biology, their genetics, their environment, their lifestyle. And then you can tailor medical decisions and other decisions based on all of that information. Having something like the SAA test means that we are one step closer to that. We can say, you have misfolded protein, you have less dopamine in your brain, you have XYZ other factors. We're going to try giving you this treatment, or we're going to attempt to affect this part of your disease. I think that it's not just about that misfolded protein either. With the steps forward that we've taken with genetic testing and with our understanding of the genetics of Parkinson's, that's something that we also can look at if somebody has a particular variant, like a LARC2 variant or a GBA variant. How do we treat them? How do we look at their disease? I think that's the broad idea of where we're going. And then in terms of shorter term, we're going to keep looking for all those people that are going to help us better understand the disease, better understand the biology. We really need to be looking not only at people who've been historically represented in research. I said we are looking at people around the world. We are consistently trying to diversify the PPMI population, the community that is participating, because if we're only looking at, let's say, white folks or people of Western European descent, then we will not actually know if the treatments that we are developing or helping to develop will be effective across the board. So that's the other thing that we're looking at. But precision medicine, that's the name of the game right now.
Yeah, when you think about it, as in population health, we're always talking about segmenting the population into groups, and it's usually been high risk, medium risk, low risk, and you're providing interventions at various points depending on that risk level. And obviously, what we're trying to do is get down to an N of 1. So we know exactly what to do for Fred Goldstein with this condition, and this is what will impact him. But as you point out, we've seen it a lot with these data sets, particularly moving into AI, that if you don't have a broad enough database that's representative of the population, what comes out on the backside is not going to be correct. And so getting that broad-based enrollment into this study is really critical for us now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that part of that also is if you even just look at what I think about is some of these commercial genetic testing companies, right? And a lot of their data has been in a very particular population, which means that the information that they give to somebody who is of a minority race, it's not going to be as accurate. So we need to have way more information at the top of the funnel to then be able to provide accurate information once we winnow down to that N of 1. I really like that analogy that you have there. I think that's a really helpful way to think about it.
Yeah, and my understanding is that when Lagos, we began that clinic was started, actually identified some new information that we're unaware of regarding some genetics, right?
Yes, this is really exciting. So in addition to PPMI, which MJFF is the sponsor of, we also are the implementation partner for a much larger genetics study. This is the Global Parkinson's Genetics Program, which is funded by ASAP, Aligning Science Across Parkinson's. The Lagos site that is part of PPMI is also part of this GP2, Global Parkinson's Genetics Program. And they, in conjunction with other parts of GP2, actually discovered a new genetic variant that was unknown to the Parkinson's world before, that it seems to only be present in people of African or African admixed ancestry. This is called the GBA1 variant, and this is incredible because we simply didn't have enough data from folks of African or African admixed ancestry until now to say there is this particular variant in this community that is unique and could be impacting the progression of their disease, could be impacting the risk that people who are living without the disease but have this variant in their DNA have. So really wonderful. And we're hoping that we'll be able to continue expanding this effort. So GP2 right now has the goal of enrolling over 200,000 people and getting their genetic information so that we can continue to do things like this. And these, the genetic information that we're looking for is in diverse populations. So around the world, people who historically have not been in Parkinson's research.
Well, that's a really fantastic way to end up this show, and I can't wait to see what keeps coming out because it's just amazing the work you and the team and obviously Michael and all of the folks at MGFF have done. So I really want to thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Fred. It was a pleasure.
And back to you, Greg.
And that's a wrap for today, folks. A big thank you to our global audience for tuning in. If Pop Health Week resonates with you, show us some love. Give us a thumbs up on your favorite podcast platform. Share it with your network and do subscribe so you never miss a future episode. Remember, we're live on Healthcare Now Radio every weekday at 5:30 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 9:30 p.m. Eastern. That's 2:30 a.m., 10:30 a.m., and 6:30 p.m. Pacific. On behalf of Fred Goldstein, myself, and the crew at Healthcare Now Radio, stay safe, stay tuned, and we'll catch you next time.